Meet Frank Abagnale Jr., a man whose life story blurs the lines between fact and fiction. Born on April 27, 1948 in Bronxville, New York, Frank's early years were marked by familial upheaval. His parents separated when he was 12, and by 15, they had divorced, leaving young Frank navigating a turbulent adolescence. At 16, Frank's penchant for mischief escalated. Armed with a gasoline credit card and a truck provided by his father, he devised a scheme that left his father liable for a $3,400 bill, a significant sum in the 1960s. This incident marked the beginning of Frank's foray into fraudulent activities. In December 1964, seeking a fresh start, Frank enlisted in the U.S. Navy. However, military discipline didn't suit him. He was discharged after less than 3 months. Shortly thereafter, in February 1965, he was arrested for petty larceny in Mount Vernon, New York. The following month, his audacity grew when he impersonated a police officer, complete with a toy gun and a paper badge, to gain entry into a woman's apartment under the guise of investigating her daughter. This stunt led to his arrest and a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation at Grasslands Hospital in Westchester County. By June 1965, Frank's criminal activities expanded geographically. He was arrested in Eureka, California, for stealing a Ford Mustang from a neighbor. Financing his cross-country escapades with stolen checks, he faced multiple charges, including impersonating a U.S. Customs official, though the latter was eventually dropped. These early offenses painted a picture of a young man testing the boundaries of law and order. After being released into his father's custody to face the stolen car charges, 17-year-old Frank decided to impersonate a pilot. He obtained a uniform from a Manhattan uniform company, purchased with money from forged checks. On July 7, 1965, he informed local media that he was a graduate of the American Airlines Pilot School in Fort Worth, Texas. However, days later, he was arrested for theft of checks in Tuckahoe, New York. Frank was sentenced to 3 years at the Great Meadow Prison in Comstock, New York, for these stolen checks. After serving 2 years, he was released into his mother's custody, but soon violated his parole with a stolen car conviction in Boston, Massachusetts, leading to an additional year in prison. Upon his release on December 24, 1968, 20-year-old Frank resumed his pilot impersonation, this time donning a TWA uniform and relocating to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. There, he ingratiated himself with a local music teacher whose daughter, a Delta Airlines stewardess, he had met in New York. Frank also befriended a local minister, claiming to hold a master's degree in social work from Ithaca College, and expressing a desire to work with vulnerable youth. His charm and fabricated credentials opened doors, but his deceit was short-lived. The minister, growing suspicious, contacted TWA and confirmed Frank's fraudulence. This led to his arrest on February 14, 1969, initially on vagrancy charges. Further investigations revealed stolen checks from his host family and a local business, resulting in theft and forgery charges. Convicted on June 2, 1969, he was sentenced to 12 years of supervised probation, but soon fled Louisiana for Europe. Frank's European escapades were marked by a series of bold cons. In Montpellier, France, he was arrested in September 1969 for stealing an automobile and defrauding local families in Klippen, Sweden. Sentenced to 4 months for theft in France, he served only 3 before being extradited to Sweden. There, he was convicted of gross fraud by forgery, served 2 months in a Malmö prison, and was banned from the country for 8 years. Upon his deportation to the United States in June 1970, Frank's criminal activities showed no signs of abating. Back on American soil, 22-year-old Frank resumed his pilot impersonation, traveling to college campuses under the pretense of recruiting stewardesses for Pan Am. At the University of Arizona, he falsely claimed to be both a pilot and a doctor, even conducting physical examinations on female students aspiring to join flight crews. None of these women ever enrolled in his fictitious program. His fraudulent check schemes continued. And on July 30, 1970, in Durham, North Carolina, he drew the attention of the FBI after cashing a personal check disguised as a Pan Am paycheck. Arrested in Cobb County, Georgia, on November 2, 1970, for cashing 10 fake Pan Am payroll checks, Frank's audacity peaked when he escaped from the local jail, only to be recaptured 4 days later in New York City. In 1971, he was sentenced to 10 years for forging checks totaling $1,448.60, equivalent to over $11,000 today, and received an additional 2 years for his escape attempt. After serving approximately 2 years of his sentence at the Federal Correctional Institution in Petersburg, Virginia, Frank was paroled in 1974. Opting not to return to his family in New York, he left the choice of parole location to the court, which assigned him to Houston, Texas. Post-release, Frank struggled to maintain legitimate employment. He held various jobs, including cook, grocer, and movie projectionist, but was often dismissed once employers uncovered his criminal past. In a desperate bid, he impersonated a pilot once more in 1974 to secure a position at Camp Madison, a children's summer camp in Texas, where he was arrested for stealing cameras from colleagues. Despite receiving only a fine, his deceitful tendencies persisted. He secured a role at a Houston area orphanage by posing as a pilot with a master's degree, tasked with finding foster homes for children. This ruse was uncovered by his parole officer, leading to his removal from the position and relocation to quarters above the officer's garage for closer supervision. Determined to turn his life around, Frank approached a bank in 1975 with a proposition. He offered to share insights into fraudulent schemes, proposing that if his information proved unhelpful, the bank owed him nothing. If valuable, they would pay him $50 and refer him to other institutions. This initiative marked the inception of his new career as a speaker and security consultant. To bolster his credibility, he falsely claimed affiliations with the Los Angeles Police Department and Scotland Yard. By 1977, Frank was delivering public talks, asserting that between the ages of 16 and 21, he had undertaken various professional roles: a pediatrician in a Georgia hospital for a year, an assistant state attorney general for another year, a sociology professor for 2 semesters, and a Pan Am pilot for 2 years. He also recounted tales of recruiting female university students as Pan Am flight attendants and evading the FBI through a daring escape from an airplane's toilet. These sensational stories captivated audiences, despite their dubious veracity. Frank Abagnale Jr.'s life story, popularized by the 2002 film Catch Me If You Can, has captivated audiences with tales of audacious cons and daring escapes. However, recent investigations have cast significant doubt on the authenticity of many of his claims. In 2020, author Alan C. Logan conducted an in-depth investigation into Abagnale's past, revealing inconsistencies between public records and Abagnale's accounts. Logan's research indicates that during the years Abagnale claimed to have committed his most notorious scams, he was, in fact, incarcerated. Records from the New York State Archives show that Abagnale was imprisoned at the Great Meadow Correctional Facility in Comstock, New York, from July 26, 1965 to December 24, 1968, covering the period when he purportedly executed his most elaborate cons. Further scrutiny reveals that many of Abagnale's alleged exploits, such as posing as a Pan Am pilot and cashing $2.5 million in fraudulent checks, lack corroborative evidence. Federal court records indicate that his actual convictions involved forging 10 Pan Am checks in 5 states, totaling less than $1,500. Additionally, his claims of escaping from a commercial airline's toilet and other dramatic episodes have been debunked by researchers. Despite these revelations, Abagnale has maintained his status as a sought-after speaker and consultant on fraud prevention. He founded Abagnale and Associates in 1976, advising companies on fraud prevention strategies. His story, as depicted in Catch Me If You Can, continues to be celebrated in popular culture, even as questions about its veracity persist. In recent years, investigative journalist Javier Leiva independently verified many of Logan's findings. In June 2022, Leiva confronted Abagnale with public records contradicting his famed narrative. Abagnale has largely dismissed these challenges, stating that such claims are not worthy of a comment. Frank Abagnale Jr.'s life serves as a complex case study in the interplay between myth and reality. While his tales of deception have entertained millions, Ongoing investigations highlight the importance of critical examination and fact-checking, especially when narratives become entrenched in popular culture.